I never thought I'd find myself sitting in the kitchen at midnight, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, questioning every single moment of the 15 years I spent building this life. 15 years. That's a long time to pour yourself into someone, into a marriage, into routines, memories, kids, bills, arguments, and reconciliations. And yet here I was, my hands wrapped around a cold mug of coffee, staring at the counter and trying to make sense of the words that had rolled off his tongue just a few nights ago. I feel unappreciated. Just like that, as if he had been rehearsing the line for weeks and finally found the right moment to drop it on me. I should have walked away right then, I guess. But part of me was too numb, too conditioned to hope that this was just a rough patch, a midlife slump, a temporary storm we could weather. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to hold on to the man I had married in my 20s, the one who used to kiss the top of my head when I fell asleep, the one who used to insist on bringing me coffee in bed on Saturday mornings even though I hated waking up early. It started like any other Thursday. I had just gotten home from my job at a marketing agency, exhausted but carrying that subtle satisfaction of feeling competent for the first time in a while. I had been working late all week, juggling pitches, client calls, and brainstorming sessions. My mind was fried, my body aching from the office chair that had slowly been eating away at my lower back, and all I wanted was a shower and the quiet of our living room. He was on the couch, scrolling on his phone, that faint frown creasing his forehead. I figured he was just tired too, maybe absorbed in work emails or whatever he pretended to be interested in when he didn't want to talk. I kissed him on the cheek, dropped my bag, and asked about his day. That's when it came. I feel unappreciated. I froze. My mouth went dry. The words felt like a slap. What do you mean? I asked, though my voice sounded smaller than I intended. He didn't look up, just tapped the screen a few times and said, almost casually, "You don't notice anything I do. All those little things I handle, nobody says thanks. Nobody sees it." My first reaction was defensiveness. I had spent the last 15 years seeing him juggle his career, our finances, and everything in between. I had noticed. I had appreciated. And yet, the way he said it made me question myself. Maybe I hadn't shown it enough. Maybe I had gotten comfortable, taken him for granted in a way that I couldn't even name. But the truth was, there was something in his tone that felt rehearsed, like he'd been saving it for a dramatic reveal. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, forced a smile, and told him we could talk tomorrow, because my gut was screaming that this was bigger than I wanted it to be. The next morning, I went to work carrying the weight of his statement with me like a stone in my chest. I kept replaying it over and over, analyzing every possible meaning. Was he implying I didn't love him anymore? Was this the build-up to something he'd been wanting to say for months? Or was it something else entirely? You see, after 15 years, you think you know the signs. You think you can read the subtle shifts in someone's energy, the way they linger over their coffee a little longer, the way their gaze drifts past you when you speak. And I had noticed a few things lately. The late nights at the office, the frequent phone calls that he hushed when I came near, the new cologne he never wore before, but I chalked it up to stress, to the inevitable midlife fatigue that creeps up and makes people distant. Now, with that statement hanging over me, every small anomaly started to feel like a clue, every tiny slip like evidence of some hidden betrayal I couldn't yet name. By Friday, the tension was unbearable. I was walking on eggshells at home, every gesture overanalyzed, every conversation a potential landmine. I tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, smiled at him when he asked about dinner, laughed at his jokes even when they fell flat, tried to bridge the gap that I didn't even fully understand. And yet, the words "I feel unappreciated" kept echoing in my mind. I started noticing the little things, the receipts on his desk, the emails he left open on his laptop, the strange texts that popped up when he thought I wasn't looking. Not that I snooped aggressively, I had never been that kind of person, but curiosity is a relentless thing. It creeps in quietly until it becomes unbearable. And that's when I saw her name. Her name in a work email, casual, friendly, unmistakable. I paused, heart hammering, the kind of pause that makes your stomach drop and your entire body tingle with dread. I knew her, sort of, from his stories. She was one of his colleagues, someone he mentioned occasionally in passing, always professional, always polite. That's all I knew. But the way her name appeared in the subject line now, it wasn't just a work message. It was different, warm, teasing, almost intimate. My chest tightened, and I felt a wave of nausea, that sinking feeling that tells you your life is about to pivot in ways you can't control. Over the weekend, I tried to keep my composure, tried to cling to the image of our marriage as something solid. We went out for brunch Saturday morning, a ritual we'd kept for years. I watched him across the table, animatedly talking about a new project, laughing in a way that made my stomach knot. I wanted to ask, I wanted to confront, but something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the fear of discovering a truth I wasn't ready to face. Or maybe it was the hope that I was imagining everything, that it was all in my head. He seemed so normal, so effortlessly charming, like nothing was wrong, and part of me wanted to believe that image, that version of him. But deep down I knew, deep down my instincts were screaming that this wasn't just about feeling unappreciated. There was someone else. I just didn't know who or how or for how long, and the uncertainty was slowly eating me alive. By Sunday night, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I needed clarity before the guilt and confusion consumed me entirely. So I did something I never thought I would. I checked his work phone when he was in the shower. I justified it as survival, as self-preservation, though I knew it was a slippery slope. The texts, the DMs, the subtle exchanges, all of it was there. Not explicit, not overt, but the way they spoke to each other carried a warmth, a familiarity, a closeness that shouldn't exist between a married man and a colleague. And then I found it, the message that shattered the illusion entirely. A simple, "Can't wait to see you later," sent at 9:43 p.m. on a Wednesday. No context, no qualifier, nothing about work. And in that moment, I realized the truth I had been avoiding for weeks. The feeling of betrayal hit me like a freight train, and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My hands shook, my chest constricted, and for the first time in years, I felt utterly, completely powerless. He had been unappreciated, he had said, but it wasn't me he was waiting for appreciation from. It was her. I spent the night in a haze, pacing our small apartment, trying to reconcile the man I married with the man who had just betrayed me in the most intimate, calculated way.
I remembered our wedding day, the way he held my hands and promised me the world, the late nights we spent talking about our dreams, the mornings we woke up to the chaos of our newborns. Everything felt like a lie now. And yet, there was a part of me that hated him, not just for what he had done, but for how normal he seemed, for how effortlessly he had compartmentalized his life, to the point where I didn't see it coming until the very edge of the cliff. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to break the walls down, but instead, I sat at the edge of the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the ceiling and crying silently. The quiet sobs that no one could hear felt like tiny admissions of defeat, each one a nail in the coffin of trust I had once taken for granted. Monday morning came, and with it the pretense of normal life. He kissed me goodbye, asked if I had slept well, and went off to work, completely unaware that my entire perception of him had shifted in the span of a single weekend. I tried to function, tried to put on a face for the kids, for colleagues, for anyone who might notice the cracks in my soul. But every second I spent at work, every client call, every email I answered, every laugh I forced into my voice, it was all colored by the knowledge of his betrayal. I found myself replaying every memory, every conversation, every moment of intimacy, and searching for the signs I had missed. And the truth was undeniable. There had always been signs. The late nights, the new cologne, the hidden phone. I had been blind because I didn't want to see, because facing the truth meant acknowledging that my life was not as secure as I had believed. And yet, the more I tried to rationalize, the more I realized that the betrayal wasn't just physical or emotional, it was strategic. He had found someone who appreciated him in ways I hadn't, someone who gave him that rush of validation he craved, and he had been living in both worlds with the kind of quiet, cruel efficiency that left me gasping for air. By the end of that day, I knew I had to confront him. Not in a calm, rational way, but in a raw, exposed way that would demand answers. I didn't want explanations. I wanted the truth, the naked, ugly truth that had been hidden behind smiles, polite conversations, and the facade of a 15-year marriage. I waited for him to come home, sitting in the living room with the blinds drawn, the shadows stretching long across the floor as the sun dipped below the skyline. When he finally walked through the door, briefcase in hand, the man I saw was familiar and alien all at once. He smiled, tiredly, and asked how my day was. I swallowed hard, my chest tight, my hands clammy, and said nothing at first. He looked at me, puzzled, and that's when I broke. I asked him, voice trembling, to explain the emails, the messages, the late nights, the little things he had said that suddenly didn't make sense. And as I spoke, I saw the flicker in his eyes, the momentary hesitation that confirmed everything I had feared. There was guilt there, yes, but also calculation, a careful weighing of words, as if he were deciding how much of the truth to let spill at that very moment. And I knew, with a crushing certainty, that what he was about to say, or not say, would change everything. I remembered the night stretching endlessly, like time itself had slowed just to torment me. He finally sank into the couch across from me, ran a hand through his hair, and gave me that tired, rehearsed sigh. "Look," he started, and I swear every word that came after was coated in this strange mixture of justification and entitlement. "It's not what you think. It's not—" I cut him off immediately, my voice sharp, trembling, desperate. "Then tell me what it is, because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like what I've been dreading." He flinched at my tone, but didn't interrupt. That's when it started. The slow confession, the way he tried to minimize everything while still spilling enough truth to make my stomach twist. The woman, her name kept floating in my mind like a bad dream, was someone he met on a work project 6 months ago. She wasn't just a colleague. She was more. He'd claimed it wasn't serious, that nothing had happened physically, but the way he described their late-night meetings, their coffee runs, the inside jokes that weren't meant for me, it was intimate in a way that felt far worse than any one kiss could have been. He said he felt alive around her, appreciated in ways he said I never managed to show him anymore. And I couldn't. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to force him to see the devastation in my eyes, but I sat there, rigid, silent, trying to process the flood of betrayal crashing over me. 15 years. 15 goddamn years of building a life together, raising 2 kids, buying a house in a suburb we both loved, sacrificing things we didn't even fully recognize. Gone, it felt, like it had never existed. He talked about feeling lonely in our marriage, like I didn't notice him, didn't recognize his efforts. And in the same breath, he admitted that someone else had been noticing him, appreciating him, giving him that sense of worth he craved. I wanted to argue, to tell him that I had always loved him, that I had seen every effort he made, that I had carried him through bad days, bad jobs, the endless grind of life. But the words stuck in my throat. They didn't matter. Not when he had already found someone who made him feel what I apparently couldn't. For the next week, the house became this unbearable pressure cooker. I didn't know if I should talk to him, avoid him, or scream until my lungs gave out. Every time he passed me in the kitchen, every casual comment, every distracted smile, it felt like salt on a wound that refused to heal. The kids noticed something, of course. My son, only 13, asked if Daddy was mad at me. My daughter, 15, just stared at me with those piercing eyes that always seem older than their age, asking with a simple, "Are you okay?" And I wasn't. I wasn't okay. I didn't even know who I was anymore in the context of our life together. He had become this stranger, this man who shared our bed, our home, our routine, but whose heart and attention were somewhere else entirely. And the realization that he could compartmentalize his life so neatly that he could still come home, joke about our kids, pretend everything was normal, it was like watching a master illusionist, and I was both horrified and helplessly entranced by it. Then came the subtle escalation. The signs were everywhere if you knew where to look. The phone he left face down, the sudden defensiveness when I asked about his day, the laughter that didn't quite reach his eyes when he recounted something from work. I became obsessed, not with suspicion alone, but with proof. I had to know how deep this went, how much of my life he had shared with her. And the thing about obsession is, once it takes hold, you can't shake it. I found myself checking his emails more than once, memorizing the patterns of his messages, the timestamps, the little nuances in the way he typed. I even followed him, discreetly, after work one day, sitting in my car down the block from his office while he walked into a coffee shop with her. Watching them together was like watching a parallel life I hadn't been invited into. They laughed, leaned close, whispered across the table, and every tiny detail felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I wanted to look away, to tell myself I was imagining it, that I was overreacting, but my eyes stayed glued to them. I had to see it. I needed to see it to believe it. And once I did, once I confirmed it, I realized that my marriage, my life as I had known it, was teetering on the edge of irreparable destruction. Work became a hell of its own. I couldn't focus on my own deadlines, my own projects, because every ping of an email, every buzz of my phone reminded me of him. I hated him, but I also hated myself for letting him get under my skin this way. I would sit in meetings, nodding and smiling at colleagues, while my mind replayed every interaction he'd had with her. I even found myself drafting confrontational messages, then deleting them, my thumb hovering over send for minutes at a time before rational thought, or fear, pulled me back. I didn't know if I wanted him gone, punished, or if part of me just wanted to hear the truth fully, raw and unvarnished, without any excuses. And the tension inside me started manifesting physically. My chest ached, my stomach was in knots, and sleep became a series of broken, restless hours, punctuated by nightmares where I was the outsider in my own home, watching him celebrate moments with her that should have been ours. The breaking point came one Thursday evening. I had picked up the kids from soccer practice and was halfway through making dinner when I got a text from him. Something casual, a running late might grab takeout message. Nothing unusual, except that it was sent while I knew he was supposedly still at work. My blood ran cold. I grabbed my keys and drove to his office, my hands trembling so violently I had to grip the wheel with both hands. When I arrived, the building was quiet, parking lot mostly empty, except for one black SUV tucked behind a row of trucks. And there she was, sitting in the passenger seat, laughing at something he said. My stomach turned over, bile rising in my throat, and for a moment I almost didn't care about discretion. I wanted to honk, scream, confront, demand, punish. But I didn't. I sat in the car for what felt like an eternity, just watching them, my heart shattering piece by piece. And that's when I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. This wasn't some fleeting attraction or midlife indiscretion. This was ongoing, systematic, a carefully nurtured parallel life built while I was at home, thinking I was still his world. When he got home that night, he was oblivious to the fact that I knew. He kissed me on the cheek, asked how my day went, and sat down at the kitchen table with the kids to help with homework. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip the walls down and expose everything. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled. I forced conversation. I helped the kids with math problems, listening to their complaints about homework and high school drama, all the while feeling a kind of cold, hollow rage simmer beneath my ribs. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed beside him, pretending to be unconscious of the lies that had already infiltrated our marriage. My mind replayed the image of him with her, over and over, and I realized something terrifying. I didn't even know if I wanted him to stay or leave. The love I had for him was so entwined with my identity that I couldn't imagine life without him. But every fiber of me screamed that trust, once broken this way, might never be repaired. Over the next few weeks, I began noticing the ways he had changed, not physically, but emotionally. The little cues I had ignored, texting under the table, leaving calls unanswered when I walked into the room, small defensiveness over nothing, became impossible to overlook. And I realized something else. He was still charming, still loving in his own way, still the man I had married 15 years ago, but only in the capacity that served him. His love had boundaries now, invisible lines that I could cross only in certain ways, and even then it was calculated. And worse, I started questioning myself constantly. Was I not enough? Had I failed somehow? Had I allowed this to happen because I was too busy, too distracted, too immersed in my own work and life? It was exhausting, mentally and emotionally, to be simultaneously angry, heartbroken, and self-blaming. And I couldn't share it with anyone. Friends would never understand the nuance, the cruel intimacy of his betrayal. Family couldn't fathom it. And so I was trapped in this claustrophobic world of secrecy, anguish, and quiet observation, my mind replaying every interaction, every moment of neglect or distraction, searching for patterns I didn't want to find but couldn't ignore. Finally, it happened. The confrontation I had been both dreading and craving. I had set it up without telling him,
choosing a night when the kids were at a friend's house. I poured 2 glasses of wine, sat across from him, and just looked at him. No words, no accusation, just a stare that carried years of history and betrayal. And he immediately knew. I didn't need to speak. He saw the fire in my eyes, the tension in my shoulders, and the quiver of my jaw, and for the first time, I think, he realized that I had seen everything. And the way he shifted in his seat, the way his eyes flicked to the floor, the hesitation in his voice when he finally said, that pause spoke volumes. It wasn't just guilt, it was fear. It was the first crack in the carefully constructed illusion of his double life. That night, the words finally spilled, unfiltered, unpolished. He admitted everything, every text, every late-night meeting, every little emotional indulgence that had been kept from me. And I listened. Every confession was a punch to the gut, a new layer of betrayal piling on top of the last. And yet, beneath the anger and hurt, there was this sickening fascination. How could he have managed this life, this secret world, for so long without detection? How could someone you share a bed, a family, a mortgage with, still live a life behind your back so completely? And as he spoke, as the details emerged, I realized something else. He wasn't just unappreciated by me. He had been actively seeking validation elsewhere, cultivating it, using it to fill a void I hadn't realized existed until it was far too late. After that night, everything shifted. I couldn't see him the same way. Not at home, not at work, not anywhere. He tried to act normal, tried to return to routines, tried to convince me that nothing had to change if I could just forgive him, move on. But I couldn't. I realized that forgiveness wasn't a switch you could flip, especially when the betrayal had been methodical, deliberate, and ongoing. Every time he walked past me, I felt this mixture of revulsion and longing. I wanted to hate him completely, to push him out of our lives, to make him feel the weight of what he'd done. And at the same time, I missed the man he used to be, the one who had held my hand through hospital rooms, celebrated our kids' milestones with unfiltered pride, and promised me, in whispered voices during sleepless nights, that we were a team. That man still existed somewhere inside him, tangled up with the person who had been carrying on behind my back. And the duality of it, love and betrayal intertwined, was like a slow, relentless poison.
I started following routines obsessively, almost as a defense mechanism. I made sure the house was in order, dinner was on time, the kids were bathed, homework check. I pretended everything was fine when friends called, when family dropped by, when neighbors popped in. But the reality was this. I was walking through a life that no longer felt mine. I would catch him looking at me sometimes, eyes lingering just a second too long, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and I felt a flash of rage that could have ignited a fire. But I didn't say anything. I learned to swallow it, to let it fester inside, because saying it out loud might have destroyed not just him, but the fragile semblance of family we still had. And part of me, deeply buried, was terrified that exposing everything fully would shatter the life we had worked so hard to build. One evening, about a month after the initial confrontation, he came home later than usual. The kids were in bed, I had poured a glass of wine, and I sat at the kitchen counter waiting for him. When he finally walked in, he was quiet, almost tentative. He set down his bag, and without preamble, he started talking about work, about deadlines, about projects. But the underlying tone, the subtext, was clear. He knew I had seen too much, felt too much, and was no longer willing to ignore it. I realized then that he was trying to charm his way back into normalcy, to assert that life could continue as if nothing had happened. But I wasn't buying it. I listened politely, nodding at appropriate moments, but inside, every word was fuel to the fire that had been burning in me for weeks. I started to notice little things, how he laughed at jokes she probably texted him earlier, how he adjusted his posture like he had learned to perform in her presence, how he lingered on certain topics that I knew were shared with her. And I hated it. I hated every second of it, but I also couldn't tear my eyes away. The kids started noticing the tension too. My daughter began asking more pointed questions about his work trips, about why he sometimes disappeared after dinner, why he always seemed distracted. My son, younger, just picked up on the general atmosphere, the quiet arguments, the moments of awkward silence, the subtle resentment that hung like smoke in the house. I wanted to protect them from the fallout, from the weight of adult betrayal, but the truth was unavoidable. They were already feeling it. And the guilt that came with that realization was unbearable.
How could I keep them safe while navigating this storm? How could I maintain the life we had built while knowing that one of the pillars of that life had been secretly crumbling for months? I started documenting everything: messages, emails, odd behaviors, inconsistencies in his stories. Part of me hated that I had to become a detective in my own home, to hunt for evidence of something I had always trusted would never exist. And yet, each piece of information, each confirmation of his ongoing connection with her, was like a grim relief. It was proof that my instincts were right, that I wasn't imagining it, that the betrayal was real, tangible, and deliberate. And with that knowledge came this sick, twisted sense of control. If I knew, if I could track it, then maybe I could figure out my next steps. Maybe I could salvage what remained of my dignity. Maybe I could protect myself from being blindsided again. The confrontation eventually escalated into arguments, late-night fights where words cut sharper than knives. He would try to explain, to rationalize, to plead, but I stopped listening to explanations. I stopped wanting justification. I just wanted honesty. And the honesty I got was worse than I imagined. He admitted that he looked forward to her attention more than he did to mine, that the validation she offered made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt for years. He didn't lie about the emotional connection. They had shared jokes, confessions, small, intimate moments that I would have sworn were reserved for me. And that was the cruelest part. The betrayal wasn't just about lust. It was about the emotional intimacy that had been quietly siphoned away from our marriage, piece by piece. I realized then that I wasn't just competing with someone else's body or presence. I was competing with someone who made him feel seen, desired, appreciated, in ways I apparently had failed to maintain over 15 years. It got worse when I started seeing how carefully he managed the logistics of his double life. Dates disguised as work meetings, sudden overtime hours, cryptic messages that could mean anything, all perfectly plausible explanations for a spouse who worked hard and traveled often. I began noticing the rhythm, the pattern, the deliberate concealment. And that realization was like a spotlight on the fragility of our marriage. It wasn't just about emotions anymore. It was about the infrastructure of deceit he had built around himself. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and helpless all at once. Every casual smile, every touch, every laugh shared with our kids felt tainted by the knowledge of what he had been keeping from me. I started questioning everything, every anniversary, every holiday, every surprise he had planned. Was it genuine love or just a careful maintenance of the illusion? The breaking point came during what I thought was a normal weekend. He suggested we go out for brunch, a small gesture I would have once cherished, and I agreed, numb and detached. We went to our usual spot, the one by the river that we had frequented for years. He smiled, made small talk, ordered our usual dishes, and I sat there, silently observing him. And then I saw it, her, in a crowd across the patio, laughing at something a friend said, completely unaware that I was watching. My chest tightened, my stomach dropped, and I realized that this was no longer just about work emails or secret texts. This was an ongoing emotional affair that had infiltrated our daily lives in a way I could no longer ignore it. I wanted to confront him there, in public, to demand explanations, to force him to see me, really see me. But I didn't. I stayed seated, silent, pretending to sip my coffee while internally my mind raced with scenarios, confrontations, and plans for what would come next. The truth of it finally hit me. I couldn't trust him anymore. Not the way I had before, not in the ways that mattered. Every touch, every word, every casual glance became a test of my own nerves, a measure of how much deceit he could still hide. And yet, part of me wanted to hold on. Part of me wanted to salvage what we had, to fight for the life we built, even if it was fractured. But the deeper I went into this, the more I realized that there was no simple path forward. Trust, once broken in this deliberate, intimate way, doesn't repair itself overnight. And even if he begged, even if he promised, even if he cried, the damage had already been done. The emotional connection, the shared life, the sense of partnership, I knew that some of it had been irreversibly redirected to someone else. The weeks that followed were a blur of observation, planning, and emotional exhaustion. I found myself cataloging every interaction, every deviation from routine, every strange glance or sudden defensiveness.
I became hyper-aware of patterns I had once ignored. The late-night emails, the subtle signs of texting under the table, the quiet detachment from home life. I noticed how he laughed in a way that didn't reach his eyes, how he leaned in ways that seemed rehearsed, how he used casual phrases he never used before. And in those moments, I realized that the betrayal wasn't just about physical attraction or opportunity. It was about emotional survival, and I had been left behind. He had been seeking validation, appreciation, attention, all things he claimed I had stopped giving him, outside the home. And now I was left grappling with the wreckage of a life that felt less mine with each passing day. It was the middle of February when I finally decided that the life we had built, 15 years, 2 kids, a mortgage, routines, memories, was no longer something I could navigate blindly. The winter in our suburban neighborhood felt harsher that year, like the world outside was mirroring the frost inside me. I remember sitting at the kitchen table after the kids were asleep, a notebook in front of me, my hands trembling, writing down everything I had discovered, every conversation, every lie, every subtle betrayal. I needed clarity. I needed to separate my thoughts from the storm raging inside me. I needed to understand, coldly, strategically, what I was dealing with before confronting him one final time. It wasn't just about infidelity anymore. It was about power, manipulation, and survival in a marriage that had quietly become a minefield. When he walked in that evening, he didn't notice the notebook, the pen laid out with neat precision, the wine glass half empty. He dropped his briefcase with a careless thud, kissed my cheek, and started talking about his day, about the project he had crushed, the emails he had finally sent. I listened, nodding when appropriate, smiling when necessary, all while my mind replayed every hidden coffee date, every late-night message, every laugh shared that hadn't been for me. And then I spoke, not with hysteria, not with anger, not with tears, but with a level of calm that startled even me. I told him that I knew everything. I didn't need to outline specifics yet. I just needed him to understand that I wasn't oblivious anymore. The way he reacted was the first honest emotion I had seen from him in months. Fear, guilt, confusion. Not guilt like a fleeting apology, but the kind that made him shrink in the chair across from me. He tried to speak, to justify, to explain, but I raised a hand. No, I said, you don't get to explain this. You don't get to make it okay. I just need to hear the truth, the whole truth. And he did it. Every detail spilled out in a torrent of words. Late-night lunches, subtle touches, the way she made him feel appreciated, the way he had craved her attention for months, the way he admitted it all without realizing that the moment he confessed, the foundation of his marriage was crumbling under his own hands. It was surreal, listening to him talk, like hearing a stranger narrate your life in a way that erased you from the story. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I just sat there, absorbing everything, processing every betrayal as if my mind were a spreadsheet, cataloging the damage, calculating the consequences. My body shook, yes, but it was quiet, controlled. Part of me hated myself for the cold detachment, for feeling more like a strategist than a hurt wife, but I realized that survival required clarity, not hysteria. And clarity meant understanding every angle, every lie, every intention. I learned about the emotional intimacy, the secret jokes, the fleeting moments that had been carefully hidden from me. And I realized that my husband had been living a double life in plain sight, skillfully managing appearances while cultivating a secret bond with someone else. After that confession, the house changed. The dynamic shifted irrevocably. The silence between us was thick, tangible. We moved around each other like strangers sharing a space, and every casual interaction carried weight. The kids noticed it, of course. They could feel the tension, the unspoken truths hanging like smoke in every room. I hated myself for dragging them into this, for allowing the foundation of their world to be cracked by adult deceit. But there was no turning back. Our life had been fractured by truth, and the pieces wouldn't fit the same way again. In the weeks that followed, I became hypervigilant. I tracked routines, noted deviations, observed interactions. Not because I wanted revenge, though part of me did. It was a defense mechanism. I needed to protect myself, my sanity, my sense of reality. Every casual glance at his phone, every subtle defensive gesture, every laugh that didn't reach his eyes, it was a reminder of the double life that had existed parallel to mine for months, months in which I had been completely blind. I started to see patterns in his behavior, the rhythms of deceit, the signals of duplicity that had once seemed innocuous. And with that understanding came power, the power to see clearly, to anticipate, to protect the pieces of my life that mattered most. Eventually, we had to face the inevitable, decisions about the future. The talks were brutal, raw, and unrelenting. He wanted forgiveness, reconciliation, the comfort of a marriage that still had physical proximity, shared responsibilities, routines.
I wanted honesty, accountability, and a complete reset. But more than anything, I wanted to regain control over my own life, over the family, over the emotional space that he had violated. And that required painful, deliberate choices. We argued, cried, and sometimes just sat in silence, two people trapped in a life they had once chosen freely, but were now bound by betrayal and shattered trust. One night, I walked past the bedroom and caught him on his phone, subtly typing something. My chest tightened, but I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I documented it, noted it, processed it. It was a pattern, one he hadn't broken even after confessing. That realization hit me harder than any secret ever could. Confession didn't equal change. Admission didn't equal accountability. The life he had been living wasn't just a mistake. It had been a sustained, calculated, parallel existence, and his behaviors didn't stop because he confessed. That night, I finally understood that the marriage I had believed in was no longer salvageable in the way I had imagined. Love alone wasn't enough. The weeks turned into months. Counseling, forced conversations, restructuring routines, negotiating boundaries. I learned to compartmentalize, to protect my emotional self, to navigate a house where one member had fundamentally altered the emotional landscape. And yet, in the quiet moments, when the kids were asleep and the house was still, I would replay his confession, the details of their interactions, the emotional intimacy that had been siphoned from our marriage, and I would feel the full force of betrayal, raw and unmitigated. I hated him, yes. I missed the man he had once been, yes. And I feared the life we were now forced to lead, fractured and suspicious, yes. But I also recognized a strange clarity in the pain. I was no longer blind. I could see, understand, anticipate, and protect myself and the family I was determined to keep whole, even if the emotional landscape had shifted irrevocably.
The final confrontation came one cold Saturday afternoon. I had taken the kids out for errands, deliberately leaving him home alone. When I returned, I found him in the living room, phone in hand, hesitation in his eyes. I didn't ask questions. I didn't accuse. I just said, "We need to decide what happens next." And for the first time, the fear, the hesitation, the uncertainty in his eyes mirrored what I had been feeling for months. No charm, no excuses, just the quiet acknowledgement of what had been done and the consequences that could no longer be ignored. We talked, truly talked, like adults who had been forced into clarity by circumstance. We discussed boundaries, intentions, expectations, and the harsh truth. Some bridges, once burned, could never be rebuilt in the same way. Some betrayals cut deeper than apologies could reach. And for the first time in months, I felt the fragile stirrings of control returning. Not over him, not over the marriage, but over myself and my own life. I won't lie, it's still messy. Every glance, every gesture, every casual remark carries the weight of what happened. The trust isn't fully restored, and perhaps it never will be. But I have learned that betrayal doesn't just affect the relationship. It changes you, sharpens you, teaches you the limits of forgiveness, and forces you to reevaluate what you will and will not tolerate. And in that hard, raw reckoning, I found a strange resilience, a way to navigate the wreckage without losing myself entirely. The house, the kids, the routines, they remain, but the lens through which I view them has shifted. I see clearly now. I see the truth without illusion, and I navigate each day armed with that awareness, determined not to be blindsided again.